The glass milk bottles clinked softly as they landed on the porch, still cold from the morning delivery. Somewhere down the street, the chime of an ice cream truck echoed off the sidewalks, while a boy tugged a red radio flyer wagon past a row of unlocked doors. The rotary phone rang with a heavy thud from the wall, its cord bouncing as someone rushed to answer. You could smell fresh-cut grass from across the fence and hear a neighbor's screen door slam shut after returning a borrowed cup of sugar. The 1940s and 1950s were not just decades. They were a feeling. Everything was heavier, louder, and warmer. Windshield wipers squeaked, engines growled, shoes clicked against linoleum floors. Coke came from glass bottles and was pulled from a humming vending machine for just 5 cents. In backyards, men tinkered with steel toolboxes while kids rode bikes without helmets, free until the streetlights flickered on. Life moved slower but felt fuller. A single paycheck stretched across a family. People waved from their porches and asked about your parents by name. The television was a piece of furniture, and when a neighbor got one in color, the whole block came over to watch. It was a time of handwritten postcards, party line telephones, and casseroles waiting on every doorstep. You did not just live in the 1940s and 1950s. You touched them, you smelled them, you felt them in your bones. And somewhere deep down, a part of you still remembers. You could leave your front door unlocked all day, and no one thought twice about it. Trust was not a luxury, it was a way of life. Neighbors watched each other's homes without being asked. If a screen door creaked open at dusk, it might be someone returning a borrowed wrench or dropping off a casserole in a warm dish towel. No text messages, no calls. People just showed up, and they were always welcome. The barbershop around the corner was more than a place for haircuts. It was a hub. Men talked politics, baseball, and family, sitting on cracked leather chairs while the scent of talcum powder filled the air. The barber knew your father's name and how your brother was doing in school. He remembered when you got your first buzz cut. Car keys were often left in the sun visor, not because people forgot, but because no one expected anything bad to happen. Strangers waved on the sidewalk. Families shared yard tools like they shared sugar, salt, and recipes. You could knock on a neighbor's door without warning and be offered coffee before you even sat down. Births meant hot meals on porches. Losses meant casseroles without a word. No one called ahead to visit. You heard a knock, and you opened the door with a smile. There were no security cameras, no fences, and barely any locks. Just people who showed up for each other without needing a reason. The neighborhood was not just where you lived. It was who you were. That kind of closeness made even the simplest moments feel big, like a community breathing in rhythm, one back porch at a time. The sound of a rotary dial turning was slow and deliberate, each number clicking back into place with a satisfying rhythm. The phone was heavy in your hand, connected to the wall by a coil cord that always seemed to get twisted no matter how careful you were. When it rang, everyone in the house heard it. The bell was loud, metal, and impossible to ignore. You stopped what you were doing and picked up quickly because there was no way to know who might be calling. If your house had a party line, you could pick up the receiver and hear the neighbors already talking. You learned to wait politely until the line was clear. There was no voicemail, no caller ID, and no second chances. If you missed a call, it was simply gone. Important directions were often sketched on napkins or scrap paper during long conversations. People took their time, spoke clearly, and repeated things to make sure they stuck. In 1951, direct dial long-distance calling became possible, and suddenly families could connect across states without going through an operator. That first clear voice coming through the receiver from far away felt like magic. The phone was not just a tool, it was an event. A conversation mattered more because it could not be saved or replayed. You could feel the hum of the line as you listened. It was warm, alive, and it made every word feel just a little more important. The television did not just sit in the corner. It stood proudly in the living room like a piece of polished furniture. The frame was made of wood, often with sliding doors that covered the screen when it was not in use. When someone on your street got a color television, word spread quickly, and neighbors came over just to see the difference. Faces looked pink instead of gray, and the sky finally appeared blue. It was not just entertainment. It felt like stepping into the future. Every show had its time slot, and when it ended, that was it. There were no reruns on demand, no second chances. You adjusted the rooftop antenna yourself, carefully turning the metal frame until the static faded and the picture cleared. It was a process, and one worth doing just to watch I Love Lucy without fuzz. Late at night, the screen did not loop advertisements. It signed off with the national anthem, followed by a sudden test pattern or silence. Even the meals looked futuristic. TV dinners came in foil trays, each section holding something warm and familiar: mashed potatoes, peas, Salisbury steak. You peeled back the metal like, opening a gift, then watched it heat under a glowing oven coil. The smell drifted out long before the timer rang. When the first nationwide live broadcast aired in 1951, it felt like the whole country was stitched together. Millions watched the same moment at the same time. That kind of togetherness made everything feel bigger. The future was not fast or overwhelming. It was slow, sturdy, and just a little bit magical. On Sunday mornings, the soft hum of gospel music drifted from open windows, mixing with the smell of breakfast and sunshine on the porch. Radio sat on kitchen counters, their wooden bodies warm to the touch, glowing with soft orange light as voices filled the house. The songs were slow, heartfelt, and full of soul. They made people pause and listen. During the week, the streets had their own rhythm. Somewhere in the distance, you could hear the familiar chimes of an ice cream truck, growing louder as it turned the corner. Children grabbed coins from glass jars and ran barefoot down the driveway, shouting to hold the truck just one more minute. The bell was not just a sound. It was a signal that joy was near. Jukeboxes sat in diners and soda shops, glowing with rainbow lights behind curved glass. You flipped through the plastic cards and pushed the metal buttons with a satisfying click. The music that came out was rich and full, with a beat that made people sway even while sipping root beer floats. In 1954, Elvis Presley's voice hit the airwaves for the first time, and everything changed. His sound was electric, raw, and alive. By 1957, American Bandstand brought that same energy into every living room, making teenagers dance in front of televisions across the country. The streets were never quiet. They pulsed with music, memories, and the kind of sound that stayed with you long after it faded. Stepping into a diner in the 1940s or 1950s felt like entering a world that smelled like sizzling bacon, warm toast, and strong black coffee. The booths were lined with red vinyl, sticky from summer heat and years of use. The counters stretched long and smooth, framed by round stools that spun slowly as you waited your turn. Behind the counter, waitresses in crisp uniforms knew your name, your favorite sandwich, and how you like your eggs. Root beer floats arrived in tall, frosty glasses, the soda fizzing over scoops of vanilla ice cream that melted just fast enough to catch on your straw. Grilled cheese sandwiches came out hot, buttery, and pressed until the edges turned golden brown. It was comfort food, made fast but with care, and it always came with a smile. Soda fountains were more than places to grab a drink. They were neighborhood hangouts. Teenagers met there after school, sipping cherry cokes and sharing fries under the soft buzz of neon signs. There was always music in the background, coins dropping into the jukebox, and the quiet hum of a milkshake blender working in rhythm. Even fast food felt personal. In the early days, McDonald's offered hamburgers for 15 cents. The menu was small, but every item had a place. It was simple, affordable, and wrapped in bright yellow paper that held the heat just right. Dining out was not just about eating. It was about being part of something. A shared table, a familiar face, a moment that fed more than just your stomach. The classroom had a smell you never forgot, a mix of pencil shavings, chalk dust, and the old wooden floor polished with something faintly sweet. Desks were made of solid wood with grooves worn deep by years of restless fingers. Some still had inkwells drilled into the top, long after anyone used them. The seats creaked when you shifted, and your shoes made a soft squeak as you walked past rows of desks, each one holding a metal lunchbox waiting for the bell. Lessons were written out on chalkboards, and the sound of chalk scraping against the green surface filled the room. Erasers left a cloud behind, and sometimes the teacher would let you clap them clean outside, sending white puffs into the breeze. The windows were tall and could be pushed open with a long pole, letting in warm air and the sound of birds just beyond the schoolyard. Recess meant hopscotch drawn in white lines on the pavement, and games of marbles played in the dirt. You brought jacks in your pocket and spent lunch breaks racing them across the sidewalk. The cafeteria smelled like steam and butter, serving hot trays of mashed potatoes, baked beans, and soft dinner rolls that stuck to your fingers. There were no screens, no buzzing devices, no apps to check, just bells that rang sharply, handwriting practice, and the scratch of paper against the desk. School was not always easy, but it was always real, and you could feel it in every corner of the day. There was a time when one job could carry an entire family. The average house cost just over $7,000, and yearly income hovered around $3,200. Yet life never felt small. It felt manageable. People paid for what they could afford, and saving was a virtue. A new sofa was not charged to a plastic card. It was picked out in a catalog, placed on layaway, and slowly paid off piece by piece until it was finally brought home with pride. Gas stations were not just pit stops. They were full-service havens. A man in a neatly pressed uniform would greet you with a smile, pump your gas for 29 cents a gallon, wash your windshield, and even check your oil without you asking. You never had to leave the car. The sound of the pump dinging with every gallon and the smell of fresh rubber hoses are etched into memory. Credit cards were barely a whisper. The Diners Club card came out in 1950, but it was for special occasions, not everyday spending. Most families never saw one. Cash was king, and trust was built face-to-face. Grocers knew your name. You could run a tab at the local hardware store and settle up at the end of the month. There was a deep rhythm to it, a slower pace that valued stability over flash. Buying a home, filling it with furniture, driving a car, feeding a family, it was all done on a single income. That idea today sounds like a fantasy, but back then, it was just life. Simple, honest, grounded life. Back when things broke, they were not thrown away. They were fixed, usually right there on the kitchen table, next to a cup of black coffee, and a screwdriver set laid out like silverware. Fathers had steel toolboxes that clanked open with heavy-duty hinges, filled with socket wrenches, pliers, and duct tape that seemed to patch up just about anything. Those boxes smelled like oil, sawdust, and time. If your toaster stopped working, you did not drive to a big store. You called the man who fixed things, and he came to your door in a pressed shirt with his name stitched on the pocket. He carried a leather case full of odd parts and tiny screws. The sound of a screwdriver turning was background music in many homes. Neighbors helped each other without needing to be asked. You would see two men under a hood, sleeves rolled up, passing tools back and forth as kids circled on bicycles. Children learned early. A boy might be handed a wrench and told to hold it steady. A girl could be taught to patch a tire or help rewire a lamp. These were not chores. They were skills, quietly passed down through gestures and repetition. People trusted their own hands. If the screen door squeaked, you oiled it. If a chair leg wobbled, you glued it and clamped it overnight. The idea of calling a professional for every little thing simply did not exist. Summer did not hum with air conditioners. It buzzed with fans and windows, and kids yelling down the block. Before cool air came from a vent, relief came from each other. People sat on front porches with hand fans and iced lemonade, talking until the sky went dark. Screen doors slapped open and shut as kids ran in for water, and back out before the screen could bounce twice. Homes were built to breathe. Thick curtains were pulled close to block the midday sun. In the evenings, every window was open, letting in whatever breeze the night could spare. You could lie on the floor with a damp washcloth over your forehead, listening to crickets sing outside. Community pools were more than places to swim. They were daily destinations. The smell of chlorine mixed with sunscreen and the faint scent of hot pavement. Kids lined up at the deep end to dive, and lifeguards twirled whistles, while radios played pop hits from a tinny speaker. The ice cream truck was magic on wheels. You could hear its jingle long before it turned the corner. Barefoot kids scrambled for loose change, and every street became a race to catch it. The joy of a melting cone in the sun was part of summer's rhythm. People gathered because they needed to cool off, to pass time, to feel less alone in the heat. Summer was not just hot, it was human, sticky, social, and unforgettable. There was nothing quite like piling into the family station wagon. Bench seats stretched from door to door, covered in warm vinyl that stuck to your legs when the sun poured in. No one clicked a seatbelt. Kids sprawled out on their stomachs in the back, reading comics or staring at clouds through the rear window. The car was packed like a game of Tetris. Suitcases stacked, coolers wedged in tight, and pillows shoved into corners. Dad had a paper map unfolded across the dashboard, tracing the route with his finger while Mom read out gas station names scribbled on a napkin from the last diner. The open road was not quiet. It rattled with the sound of tires on concrete and the low hum of the AM radio. Someone was always asking how much longer, and someone else was always holding in a bathroom break for just 10 more miles. You stopped often not for fun, but because the car needed it. Full-service gas stations felt like little pit stops from a race. A man in a uniform came out to clean the windshield, check the oil, and top off the tank. The smell of gasoline mixed with the rubbery scent of tires baking on hot pavement. Sometimes it was the 1955 Chevy Bel Air that carried you, long, gleaming, and proud, slicing through miles like it was built to roam. Those trips were not just about the destination. The drive was a memory. There was a time when television did not just entertain. It taught. Families would gather around a single set, and the glow from the screen would light up the living room like a tiny fireplace. You knew what day and time your favorite show came on, and if you missed it, that was it. There were no reruns waiting on demand, and no way to rewind. Television came with a rhythm. After dinner, kids would sprawl on the shag carpet while parents sank into the couch. Someone might have to adjust the rabbit ears until the picture stopped fuzzing. There was no remote, so whoever was closest to the television became the unofficial channel changer. Shows like Leave It to Beaver, Father Knows Best, and The Andy Griffith Show always had a message. By the time the credits rolled, you had learned something about honesty, kindness, or taking responsibility. It was gentle, but clear. Characters made mistakes, but they owned up. Problems were solved through talking, not shouting. The music in those shows still echoes soft, hopeful, and steady. Even the theme songs had a kind of comfort to them, like a friend welcoming you home. It felt safe. And when the national anthem played before the screen faded to black for the night, you knew it was bedtime. Television once wrapped around the day like a warm ending. Back then, it was not just background noise. It was part of how you grew up. There was a time when childhood lived entirely outside. No phones, no tablets, and no digital distractions. The world was your playground, and was made of grass, gravel, and chalk. You would head out after breakfast and not come back until the streetlights blinked on. That was your curfew. No one had to say it out loud. You just knew. Sidewalk chalk covered the pavement in wild colors. Driveways became hopscotch courts, and front steps turned into chalk-covered masterpieces. The dust would stick to your fingers, and you would wipe it on your shorts without thinking twice. Marbles clinked in pockets and bounced across dirt patches as kids crouched down to knock each other's glass beauties out of chalk-drawn rings. Everyone had a few favorites. The shiny cat's eyes, the big steelies, or the swirly ones with cloudy centers. Roller skates with metal wheels clattered loudly across the sidewalk. The sound echoed off garage doors as kids tried to balance using a little bit of momentum and a lot of scraped knees. Hula hoops spun around hips, arms, and even necks, while jacks scattered across linoleum floors and driveways, waiting to be scooped up with bouncing red balls. There was risk in the fun, real risk. Lawn darts flew dangerously close to bare feet. Monkey bars blistered palms. But nobody cared. That was just play, and it was freedom. You learned by doing. You solved problems face to face. You came home dirty, exhausted, and happy. Childhood then was not filtered, programmed, or paused. It just happened, in real time, right out your front door. There was a quiet power in the way homemakers ran the household. They rose early, hair curled tight in metal rollers, the scent of aquanet clinging to the morning air. While the world outside still yawned, they were already whisking pancake batter, ironing shirts, and scrubbing counters. The kitchen was their command center. Spam casseroles sizzled in Pyrex dishes. Jell-O salad shimmered in lime green and cherry red, often suspended with bits of canned fruit or marshmallows. The pantry held treasures, cans of green beans, peaches, condensed milk, and soup that could stretch a meal to feed an entire family. Recipes were not digital or fancy. They were clipped from magazines and passed down in stained notebooks, every measurement done by feel. There was no dishwasher humming in the background. Dishes were scrubbed by hand with bar soap or powder detergent, the hot water turning fingers red. Laundry meant wringing out soaked towels by hand or guiding them through a manual wringer. White sheets flapped like sails on backyard clotheslines, soaking up sunshine and fresh air. Homemakers worked without breaks or fanfare. Floors were waxed on hands and knees. Bathrooms sparkled without sprays or wipes, just grit and a good sponge. They made a house feel like home through sheer effort, warmth, and an eye for detail. Every chore, every meal, every folded shirt was done with a kind of pride we rarely see today. It was not about glamour. It was about love and responsibility. There was a special kind of magic in piling into the car and heading to the local drive-in. Windows rolled down, popcorn passed between laps, and kids in pajamas stretched out in the back seat as a giant outdoor screen flickered to life. The scent of buttered popcorn mixed with summer grass and engine exhaust, and there was always someone who forgot to turn off their headlights. Entertainment felt like an event, but it did not have to be expensive. Movie tickets were just 48 cents, and you did not need to plan weeks in advance. You simply walked up, paid in change, and found a seat. Inside the theater, the heavy red curtains would part, and before the main feature began, the screen lit up with silly animated shorts, classic cartoons that made everyone laugh, no matter their age. Television was still new, and families gathered around one set in the living room. There were only a few channels, and whatever was on, you watched it. You might have caught a black and white western or a live broadcast that felt almost like theater. Commercial breaks were brief, and you never worried about skipping ahead or hitting pause. You just enjoyed the moment. In 1955, Disneyland opened its gates for the first time. Walt Disney himself stood before the world and welcomed everyone to a place where fantasy and reality could live side by side. It was not about roller coasters back then. It was about wonder, imagination, and walking into a storybook. Back then, entertainment was not personalized or algorithm-driven. It was shared. Everyone watched the same shows, laughed at the same jokes, and remembered the same songs. It felt smaller, closer, like it belonged to all of us at once. Back then, people wrote postcards from vacations instead of sharing posts. Glossy card with sunsets, beach piers, or neon-lit motels arrived in the mailbox days later, sometimes even after the sender had returned home. The handwriting might be crooked or smudged, but it felt like a gift. You could feel the sand still clinging to the envelope in your mind. There were no answer machines, and if someone called while you were out, they just tried again later. That simple act made every phone call feel more intentional, more personal. Voices mattered more because they could not be replayed. There was a kind of patience built into the way we connected. Neighbors dropped by unannounced, usually with a covered dish or a pie in hand. No text beforehand. Just a knock, a smile, and maybe a breeze of perfume or cigarette smoke as the screen door swung open. You would put on a fresh pot of coffee and sit for hours, letting the day unfold naturally. Sometimes strangers knocked too. Door-to-door encyclopedia salesmen came dressed like businessmen, lugging sample volumes and promising a better future through knowledge. Children would gather around to flip through the colorful illustrations while the adults negotiated payments. It was not just about books. It was about aspiration, pride, and bringing the world into your living room. Communication took time, but that time made everything feel more real, more lasting. Every message, every visit, every word meant something deeper, simply because it was earned. When you were sick back then, you did not go to the doctor. He came to you, wearing a fedora and carrying a worn leather bag. The family doctor would step into your living room like an old friend. He knew your name, your parents, your siblings, and even your dog. His stethoscope was always cold, his voice calm, and his presence reassuring. There was something comforting about hearing your diagnosis while still wrapped in your quilt. In 1955, everything changed with the polio vaccine. Parents lined up their children, sleeves rolled up, holding their breath with hope. It was not just a shot. It was a promise that the worst fear of their time might finally be gone. The moment was quiet, but echoed across playgrounds and swimming pools where fear had once lived. A couple of years earlier, the first successful open-heart surgery gave people reason to believe in miracles. It was a beginning of medicine turning toward possibility, not just survival. And yet, hospitals were smaller, humbler. Nurses wore white caps, and doctors still made handwritten notes on paper charts. Oddly enough, even inside clinics, cigarette ads lined the walls. Doctors smoked in their offices while reassuring patients about their health. It was a strange contradiction, but one that belonged fully to that era, when science and habits were still learning how to live side by side. Healthcare then felt close. It felt human. It was less about forms and insurance and more about faces, visits, and trust. Something about the late 1950s felt like the world was opening up. In 1959, Hawaii officially became the 50th state. Suddenly, children were spinning globes and pointing to the Pacific, marveling that paradise was now part of America. Postcards of volcanoes and hula dancers filled mailboxes, and pineapples did not seem so exotic anymore. It felt like the edge of the world had moved just a bit closer. A few years earlier, in 1958, something the size of a fingernail would quietly change everything. The microchip. Nobody could see it, and most did not even know it existed. But tucked inside labs and whispered about in scientific circles, it became the tiny heart of a new future. It would eventually power homes, schools, televisions, and dreams. In 1956, the interstate highway system was born. Overnight, maps grew veins. Roads reached small towns and long-forgotten corners. Diners popped up like mushrooms. Families piled into station wagons, chasing the horizon, their children staring out the windows with wind in their hair. America stretched wider. Sunday drives turned into cross-country adventures. It was not just about getting somewhere. It was about getting there and back in Hollywood. Marilyn Monroe did more than just pose for cameras. In 1955, she co-founded her own production company, challenging an industry built by men. It was not just about fame. It was about owning her story. That shimmer behind the screen was turning into something more powerful. Independence, ambition, control. These moments did not feel like revolutions. They felt like quiet shifts, small changes that only later would prove massive. In living rooms, classrooms, and boardrooms, the pieces of modern America were falling into place. One heartbeat, one breakthrough, one bold step at a time. There was a time when kitchens gleamed like spaceships. Chrome was everywhere, on toasters, refrigerators, coffee pots. It caught the sunlight in a way that made mornings feel new. Opening a cabinet revealed pastel dishes and patterned tumblers, all neatly stacked. There was pride in a polished counter, in everything matching just right. Fathers tipped their hats before heading out the door, and not just for church. Men wore fedoras as part of everyday life, like putting on socks. Hats were not accessories. They were statements. You could tell something about a man just by the crease in his brim. And then there was the click of the Kodak Brownie camera. Small, boxy, and always ready to capture a birthday cake or a beach day. Photos had a different weight then, both physical and emotional. You did not scroll through them. You waited, weeks sometimes. That made the memories richer. Salons were sacred spaces. Pink capes, bubble dryers, and the sweet smell of Aqua Net lingered in the air. Women would spend hours there, flipping through magazines and talking about everything from movie stars to meatloaf recipes. Hair was not just styled, it was sculpted. Television sets were not flat or thin. They were wooden furniture, heavy, grounded, sometimes with doilies on top or framed photos leaning against the sides. Changing the channel meant standing up, turning a knob, and hearing that satisfying click. And for everything else, you went to the department store downtown. Wooden floors creaked under your feet. Salespeople knew your name. You could touch the fabric, sit on the couch, and smell the leather of new shoes. Everything had texture. Everything had weight. Life felt more solid then, like it was built to last. There was something in the way the world moved back then, slower, but not sleepy, just deliberate. Days were measured in the smell of dinner cooking, the clink of a milk bottle on the porch, or the shuffle of cards at the kitchen table. You could hear footsteps on linoleum, and the distant hum of the television felt like a heartbeat in the home. People looked each other in the eye. A handshake mattered. You knew the names of your neighbors, and they knew yours. Even strangers felt familiar, like everyone was part of the same quiet rhythm. You waited for things, letters, photos, phone calls, and the waiting made everything more valuable. We remember the colors, the chrome, the wood grain, the sound of the radio crackling to life on a Sunday morning. We remember the joy of nothing planned and everything meaningful. It was not perfect, but it was warmer. Somewhere between automation and algorithms, something human slipped through the cracks. The way people used to sit and talk without glancing at a screen. The way laughter echoed louder in rooms filled with family instead of Wi-Fi. Maybe it is not about going back. Maybe it is about remembering what was real, what made us feel grounded, connected, and alive. Which of these do you remember? Drop your forgotten favorite in the comments, because maybe, just maybe, someone else remembers it too. And that connection, that memory, might be exactly what we are all still looking for. So if any of this made you smile, you had an epic childhood. And maybe, just maybe, it is time to hit like, subscribe, and share with someone else who remembers what wonder felt like.